you get involved in soil and water conservation and your work with soils? Where did that come from?
Well, growing up, as we talked about in Towanda, McLean County, and my grandfather was a farmer, and just, as a kid, walking beans, baling hay, shelling corn, having that experience of working on the farm, just was a great experience, and just really loved that. And I always had this interest in maps. I could sit with an atlas or a road map for hours, just looking at the maps, studying the maps. Really had that interest. So when it came time to go to college, I was looking at majoring in geography. And Northern Illinois had a good geography department, so that's where I ended up going. In the geography department, introduction to soil science. And I took it. And I loved it. I didn't know that there was such a thing, really. Even growing up, in central Illinois and having the farm background to some extent, just didn't realize that you could major in soil science. But I took that course, fell in love with it, and the professor up there offered 18 hours of different soils courses, took us on field trips all over the country, and it was like, well, this is what I'm going to do, because it's a mix. If you look at what soils is, what soil science is, it's a mix of all the sciences: chemistry, physics, biology, statistics. It just has all those sciences, and then it's the soil survey part of it is working with maps, making the soil map, which I loved, and then you were outside, which I loved. So it's just a matter of, I think, what your passion is, when you don't know what your passion is, maybe, until one day it just kind of hits you that this is what I want to do.
Well, and so often people forget that soil's there. We just take it for granted.
Oh, exactly. Yeah, really do. Yeah, most people don't have the understanding or appreciation for the resource that's out there. And everything we do, as we talked about before, goes back to the soil.
Everything goes back.
Everything we do goes back to the soil.
And in Illinois, we have some of the most fertile soil around, and yet people still forget it. Can you tell us a little bit about the state soil?
Sure. And we talked about that a little earlier, that the whole effort went back to the early 80s when I think a group here in Illinois, the Illinois Soil Classifiers Association, realized that we have a state flower, a state tree, a state bird, all these state symbols, but we were missing a symbol that really all the other symbols depend on, and that was the soil. And you have state symbols because you want to have a symbol that somehow recognizes the importance of your natural resources. So that's why you have those state symbols, and every state has them. So you look at Illinois and what Illinois is about, where agriculture is big time and depends on the soil, and we didn't have a symbol to represent that. So anyway, this Illinois Soil Classifiers Association went through a process to look at all the different soil types that we have here in Illinois, and there's over 600 different soil series that we map here in Illinois, and to try to find one that would really represent the resource. And through that process, the Drummer soil series, Drummer Silty Clay Loam, came out as the soil that would probably be best to represent soil resources, to be a state symbol. And so then the next step was, well, okay, you can have that, but to really have it officially designated, you got to go through the legislative process, get the General Assembly, to pass a bill and get the governor to sign it. So we started that effort. I say we, the Illinois Soil Classifiers, back in the early '90s. Gordon Ropp, who was a state rep from Bloomington Normal area, and an ex-director of the Illinois Department of Ag, we asked Gordon if he'd be interested in sponsoring that bill, and he jumped right on it. He said, because he recognized the importance that if you had a symbol, then how it could be used in educational purposes to inform people, increase the understanding and awareness of the resource. So Gordon was good enough to take that on and caught a lot of flack from some of his colleagues. Stupid legislation, what are you wasting your time on this for? But he did, I think, a very good job of promoting it and explaining, why we needed the symbol. Well, anyway, that was in '91, and I think that it didn't even get out of committee, the bill that we had proposed, and then I think he brought it up again next year, and it got out of committee and actually passed the House, but then failed in the Senate. And then we let it sit for a while. We had some people tell us, you need to get school kids involved. So we went to the 4-H annual convention. We went to FFA's annual convention, had the kids vote on those original 7 soils that were nominated, and Drummer came out again, looking at the 4-H kids and the FFA kids, the FFA, the VOAG teachers, brought it into the classroom in the fall of, I want to say, 94, 95, and kind of helped us get some promotion with the high school kids. And so then drummer still came out. Here's the soil that ought to represent the resource. So then again, we finally went back and got a number of different representatives to sponsor bills, and it failed for 1 or 2 years. And then finally, in 2001, the Monticello FFA group and the FFA chapter from the Chicago High School for Ag Sciences got together and really promoted it and did a lot of politicking with the General Assembly, and it passed finally in 2001 and was signed as a bill in August 2001. So now we have a state soil, Drummer Silty Clay Loam.
And Drummer is named after Drummer Township in Ford County?
Ford County.
Which is it's the last county established in
the
state
is
of
actually.
Illinois.
It is.
And
it
it's,
is.
what was Ford County like back in the 1830s? Where in Drummer Township? What was it like?
It was basically, people would have called it a swampland. I mean, you had these tall marsh-like sedges and grasses that were growing, and that's what Drummer. Drummer is a poorly drained soil that is a prairie soil, so it has this real dark, thick surface layer, and if you can drain it, it's one of the most productive soils in the world. And 99% of the Drummer soils have been tile drained and are in cropland, and that's one reason we have. We lead the country in soybean production and number 2 in corn production, because of not just the Drummer soil, but those types of soils, those prairie soils that we have here in central Illinois, are some of the best soils in the world.
And a lot of people say that the plow, John Deere's plow, was the agricultural invention, but it that changed the world. Think about the aspect of tiling and what happened there.
Oh,
and how we were able to he turned the soil over, but then they were able to drain it.
Exactly, and they are correct in a way that until the John Deere, I guess, really invented that steel bottom plow. They weren't able to bust that prairie sod. Even the better drained prairie locations and soils were hard to turn over without that steel plow. But once they busted the prairie back in the 1850s, 1860s, and saw how fertile those soils really were, and then coming in with the drainage effort that must have been unbelievable, what they had to do back in those days.
The drainage effort today is tough.
Yeah, to think about doing that stuff by hand, and the equipment they had, and digging those ditches, and then putting in those clay tiles.
And the people that made the clay tiles.
Yeah, exactly. Well, yeah, so many communities in the state had tile factories, and so it was big business back then. But until the prairie sod was busted and drained, a lot lot of people considered it a wasteland out there.
And Ford County was the last county.
And it was the last county, and Ford is pretty flat and black. I mean, it's pretty level, a lot of poorly drained soils there. But again, a lot of the best soils in the world.
And Drummer is across the state. We find Drummer across the state.
Yeah, well, it's more in the northern part of the state because it's a soil that is formed in windblown silt, or this what we call loess, over glacial outwash materials, and it's from the last glacial episode, which is the Wisconsin episode, which was the last glacial ice left about 10,000 years ago. So they're relatively young soils, so they occur in northern and northeast Illinois. But they're in, I think, about 40 of our counties, 1.5 million acres. So it is the most extensive soil series in the state. So it's a good representative of what we have here in Illinois.
And what would be the runner-up? If it weren't Drummer, what do you think the runner-up would be?
Well, Ipava probably was one of the soils that was nominated way back when, and it's a real good soil too. Real similar to Drummer, not quite as wet naturally. It probably needs to be tiled to be for optimum productivity, but the water table is not as high in the profile, and it's formed in more than 60 to 80 inches of this windblown silt or loess. Where Drummer is just 40 to 60 inches over glacial outwash, the Ipava has a thick loess cap, and that parent material that those soils were formed in, this windblown silt, is some of the best soil materials in the world also. That's why the soils are so